All right, folks, welcome back to the How to Start a Cannabis Farm podcast. My name is Jared, and I am your host. Today we are back with Chapter 3. But first, if you just tuning in and you haven't heard about the Growing While Growing Broke segment, this is all about life struggles, obstacles, and changes and issues we might experience as passionate farmers or entrepreneurs trying to pursue our dream, all the while going broke in the process. So, started off, got to thank our sponsors, which is just us. Check out our website, howtostartacannabisfarm.com. You can buy hemp genetics, you can buy hemp flower, and be redirected to our other website, mellowmoosehemp.com. That's MELLOWMOOSE hemp.com for all of your organic CBD goodies. Also, if you feel like supporting the website, or the podcast, I should say, we just got a new Patreon page. It's Patreon, patreon.com/how-to-start-a-cannabis-farm, but the initials, not the word. So HTSACF. That's patreon.com/HTSACF. Alright, so the last episode was all about feeding yourself and your plants on a budget. Well, mostly it was about feeding your plants. But it's definitely a great skill set or tool to have in your toolbox. But what happens when you just can't make everything happen? And you got to consolidate. So I'd like to welcome you to the next chapter of Growing While Growing Broke, When to Consolidate. So most people have heard of the term or the phrase tactical retreat, but few have actually taken the time to dive into the expression, or even fewer have had to actually do that, whether in business or actual war. But it's probably one of the best tools an entrepreneur or farmer can have, also known as an exit strategy. But let me explain. We're not actually at the exit strategy point yet. A tactical retreat first comes from a proper assessment of the current situation, which means weighing out all the various possibilities and corresponding efforts. The purpose is not necessarily to retreat, but rather regroup in a better, more advantageous position without losing the will to fight. In terms of entrepreneurship and farming, this means the consolidation of time and energy. So, given the current scenario of being broke and barely able to feed yourself, and now your plants are beginning to suffer, it's time to begin collecting data and start chopping plants. It's a sad thing to do, but eventually it becomes time to cut your losses and get what you can and move on. So here's my current situation that may give you a little bit more insight. I've given this property that I'm at, Mellow Moose Farms, I've given it every penny that I can afford to put in. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get to the point where I am, and that's just about broke. I've already adjusted my diet, as we spoke about previously, I think in the first chapter. I've already gone through the anxiety and depression phase. Just like the second chapter, I use ferments, but I've been using those already, but now I've begun relying on them since I couldn't afford to buy anything else that I normally use, so I was making do with what I had. I've got multiple projects going on also. I've got a couple light depths going, a few small greenhouses for making regular seed crosses. I've got a back terrace for smaller plants for a femseed production project. I got a big old soil pad for full-term plants that are doing just okay because lack of funds. I haven't been able to feed them what they want. And then there's the test pit. The test pit is basically rock, dust, clay. That's it. I originally wasn't going to plant it, but I decided to do it anyway with a couple hundred plants for data collection. Well, really, there's probably 600 to 1,000 plants there, but only 200 or 300 holes because I plant multiple plants per hole. Well, since funds have started drying up a little bit faster than I anticipated, I've reached my own tactical retreat, or my own consolidation effort. The test pit was for testing purposes anyways, and so it's not too much of a hit to chop everything, or chop most of them, but I can't afford to feed everyone at once and reach the point where I had hoped to begin chopping. So it's time to start chopping. My initial goal with this was to grow everything out all the way through flower, make use of the plants, get some flower, sell that, make money off of it, and fund the research effort. But again, because everything else is suffering, and due to a herm pollen contamination issue, I can't afford to also leave those plants there for testing purposes when there's a possibility that one or a few or multiples will turn herm and then contaminate the rest of my seed projects. So instead of chopping everything at once, though, what I decided to do was, decided to try and collect data off each one. Now, if you want to, you can write it down, or you can just keep it in your mind. I usually do a little bit of both. But the point is to try and learn something from each plant as you chop it. Whether that means assessing each individual nutrient deficiency in each plant you're about to chop, and kind of get an idea of how many plants or the percentage of plants that might experience this deficiency or this deficiency, which will give you a better idea of how to move forward when you decide to grow those plants out again next time. Or just comparing things like leaf serration and corresponding growth rates with other surrounding plants. That's up to you. But as we discussed previously, each plant is a graded test on your soil's ability to harbor life. So with each plant being essentially a separate test, you can look at them individually, but when you add them up collectively, it should give you a better idea or perspective on the overall testing population and environmental factors and potentially areas of improvement, not just to your soil, but your cultivation philosophy, and if you're a breeder, the genetics. I mean, the goal, at least for breeding, is to produce stable. Your goal is to produce stable genetics. I was thinking sustainable for some reason. Genetics that are capable of sustaining themselves. So out of the couple hundred holes or 1,000 plants that I planted in the test pit, as of now, I've got it written down that there were 5, but really, after I finish culling today, there's probably about 15 plants that physically stood out above the rest. Some of them physically stood out in the sense of height. I mean, there was one plant that was and it was a female. It's a good foot, maybe 2 feet taller than the rest. But I'm also skeptical about that one because some of those manly plants can be manly plants. Even though it's a female, I gotta keep an eye on that one for herm traits. But there's about 15 plants that stood out above the rest. Some of them had better structure. One plant was just really far along flowering, much further than the others. And it was frosty. It wasn't the best looking plant, but I decided not to cull it just to see what happens. Now, the majority of them were the same height. 25% would be what I would consider runts. And within that 25%, maybe 10% of those were like extreme runts. I mean, to the point where you didn't even see them. Like, you would have, a piece of grass was taller and bigger than some of these. But from all this, you can kind of ascertain which plants will be strong, which ones will have the largest or the biggest will to live, and an ability to mine nutrients. You can get an idea of genotypes, and if you've got them separated in different areas, maybe a phenotypic expressions, so you can get an idea of what this environment will do to this plant. So I guess to give you an example of that, let's say you and somebody else, or maybe you're growing a 100-acre farm or something, and you've got one area that's just got super frosty plants and another area that doesn't. Microclimates are a big factor to craft cannabis and to really just craft anything. So paying attention to the microenvironment or the microclimates and understanding, well, maybe this area is a little bit colder, maybe I don't know, the runoff flows differently underground, I don't know, something. You just have to pay attention to your own little environment and try and understand from a data collecting perspective how these things correlate. But as you're culling everything, don't forget, just like we talked about in chapter 2, all those extra plants, you can ferment them. And if you don't remember the recipe, weigh both the plants out, the brown sugar out, make sure they're equal weights, mix them together, add a little bit of brown sugar on top, put a lid on it, cover it up for about a week, strain the liquid off, use it at a 1 to 1,000 rate, so 1 gallon equals 1,000 gallons. 1 gallon of ferment, 1,000 gallons of water. So now, after you're consolidating though, with consolidation comes better rationed resources. And that's the goal of consolidation, is to make better use of what you have when you have the option of doing it. Let's see. Yeah. So you should begin seeing an overall improvement of the rest of your crop. If you're doing it at the right time and your consolidation is preemptive. That is one thing I will say is, ideally, you shouldn't be consolidating when you need to. You should be doing it when you have the option, so that you can always stay ahead, which means always assessing your situation. You should also have a little bit more free time. If you're, consolidating things at the right time, then you're thinking ahead. So that extra free time, you can, if you have to get a second job, like we talked about in chapter 1, you can do that. If you have to find alternative sources of income, whether it's, I don't know, putting up a billboard on your property or something. I don't know why I thought of that. Or maybe you just want to take time and tend to your plants a little more, because you can really improve the quality of your plants by doing so. Do that. But I don't know. Maybe you decide to start fermenting everything with that extra time. But the idea behind the consolidation is to, or the quote-unquote tactical retreat, is to stay in the game. It's not a fun process, but it's there so that you can stay in the game. Sometimes we take a few licks and we got to figure out how to guard ourselves a little bit better. But it's not the end. The purpose of this isn't to run away. It's to find a better approach, to overcome our obstacles, and win. It's funny because the other day I read something that said, the obstacle in your path isn't an obstacle in your path. It is the path. So, getting annoyed, anxiety, depression, just like we discussed in chapter 1, remember that it's just part of the game. Essentially, sometimes you get taxed by life and you got to make do with what you have. The more capable you are of doing that, and the more you can do with what you have, whether it's through consolidation or through efficiency, the further you can get. After all, doing the most with the least is exactly what budgeting is all about. I don't know, you can call it restructuring if you'd like. But to wrap all this up, money problems, they happen to everyone. Your passion, desire, and ability to think on your feet will be your savior. There's plenty of ways to get from point A to B. Plenty of ways. For instance, when I moved to Oregon, I had a trailer attached to my car. And there was a strip of highway that didn't have any gas stations on it anywhere, it seemed. And my gas gauge started to get closer and closer to empty. And I started thinking, what am I going to do? Way the fuck out here in BFE. And I don't want to get stuck. Then it hit me. If I dropped off my trailer on the side of the road, I would actually improve my gas mileage enough to get me to the gas station. Then I could fill up and then come back and get my trailer. But if I kept the trailer on and decided to risk it, there might be a point of no return. As in, even dropping off the trailer after that point, it wouldn't give me enough gas mileage to get to the station. So I assessed everything and I made my decision. There's many ways to get from point A to B. But just because your trip is a little different doesn't mean you failed. Just means you're going to have a great story to tell when it's all done and finished. I risked it, though. I kept my trailer on and I just ran it. And right as I came to a gas station, my gas light came on. The universe was looking out for me, and it'll look out for you too. Trust in yourself. You got this. You wouldn't be here, and you wouldn't be listening to this if you didn't. This is a much shorter one. I don't really have much to say on this. Thanks for listening to the How to Start a Cannabis Farm podcast. The Growing While Growing Broke segment. Chapter 3. Consolidation.